seeing yourself in media, seeing yourself in a book, seeing yourself on TV or in a movie, or even seeing someone who shares your identity but expresses it differently. If there is representation that you can access, it shows you that like the LGBTQA community is not a monolith and there's room to be LGBTQA plus and still be who you are. And you also don't have to be alone.
Welcome to Season 4 of I'm Feeling Queer Today, a podcast that amplifies the voices of LGBTQ plus young people for listeners like you, whoever you are. And brought to you by the Future Perfect Project. I'm your host, Alex K. Masse.
And I'm your other host, Samuel Smalls Jr. For Season 4, we're taking a look at all the ways the LGBTQ plus community has created culture around us, from literature and journalism to drag performance and the world of fantasy. We're calling this season Creating Culture.
And that's culture with a Q, of course. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on the spectacular world of queer literature.
Alex, were you a real bookworm growing up?
I absolutely was. I had more books than I did friends for a while. I was very much into the whole fantasy world and just wanting to get away from everything from a very young age. I was like, I want to read these books about cats. Thank you. So, how about you, Sam? What's the first book that you really saw yourself in?
Okay, the first book I ever saw myself in was The House of Hades, which is in the Heroes of Olympus series, which is a spin-off of the Percy Jackson books. And the Percy Jackson actually is the first book I ever read. First novel I ever read, at least. And House of Hades, it was the first time I ever saw a queer person in a book. It was also a series that I had grew up with. And so it was just like, I have never felt that like warm explosion like in my heart center since.
I love that. Shall we get into the episode?
Yes, we should. Our very first segment is all about banned books, produced by my co-host, Alex.
Yay, that's me. This segment kind of came to me because I've always been so interested in how queer stories continue to persevere and move forward, even when it feels like the whole world is against us. And with the contemporary issues, to put it lightly, around queer voices, especially in queer lit, it was really great to look back in time and see that queer book bans are unfortunately nothing new, but neither is our ability to persevere and continue to tell our stories.
I can't wait to hear it. But first, here's a fun fact about the wondrous world of literature from IFQT producer Lily Mueller.
Fun fact of the day. The first queer periodical, Uranus, by German lawyer, journalist, and queer pioneer Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, is from 1870.
Queer literature is nothing new. Neither are the attempts to suppress it. What's happening right now, particularly in North America, is deeply frightening. So much of the censorship feels like a step back, one that only feeds dangerous misconceptions about queer identity. Even the most innocent of publications can find itself in legal danger. I live in Canada, and an author from the same province as myself has had her book taken to the Supreme Court because parents were uncomfortable with its content. The book, you ask? Pride Puppy by one Robin Stevenson. It is a rhyming alphabet book about a puppy that gets lost during a pride parade and how everyone comes together and helps the puppy find its family. It includes such harrowing language as E for everyone under the sun, F for feathers, for flags, and for fun. Terrifying. Apparently, exposure to the contents of Pride Puppy in schools went against some parents' so-called religious freedom, because of course it did. But like I said, this isn't new. They've tried to silence us before, and it's never stuck. We always find our voices in the end. The reasoning employed hasn't changed much either. As Maria J. Quintana Rodriguez observes in her article on queer literary censorship in the 1950s, attempted book bans, homosexuality, and anything else that broke out of the mold of the hetero, all-American nuclear family was considered godless and communist. As she states, without the nuclear family, the mold of American society would crumble, leading to fears of communist infiltration. And people feared that the collapse of the nuclear family was totally inevitable if people were, gasp, exposed to queer literature. Does that sound familiar here in the 21st century? Probably. But that whole era could be its own segment. For this segment, I want to look at 3 samples of suppression from centuries past in queer literature. Before we dive in, I want to give some acknowledgements. First of all, many queer authors never explicitly named their work or themselves as being queer, but I want to acknowledge them for being brave enough to put themselves out there, even if in covert, coded ways. I also want to give the other acknowledgement that some of the authors I actually will be discussing have written or done some pretty awful things. I'm not going to excuse it as them being quote-unquote artists of their time, and I want to name that these people may have perpetuated harm in the past. Without further ado, let's start in the 90s, specifically the 1890s. Oscar Wilde was an Irish playwright, poet, and one-time novelist, releasing The Picture of Dorian Gray as a novella in 1890, chapter by chapter, through a magazine called Lippincott's, and as a full-length novel the year after. What you might know is that portions of this book were read at Oscar Wilde's trial for gross indecency, but did you know that the book was also censored by the publisher before the court was even involved? Because it was! Actually, without Wilde's knowledge or consent. There are in fact 3 versions of the book. There is the original manuscript, there is the Lippincott's novella version, and there is the final novel. As Nicholas Frankel records in The Picture of Dorian Gray, an annotated, uncensored edition, the original manuscript had what the Lippincott's editor called, quote-unquote, a number of things which an innocent woman would make an exception to. So, about 500 words were cut, most of them having to do with any implication that the 2 major main characters were attracted to each other. Heaven forbid. Even then, when the novella came out, it was still too darn gay and caused public outcry, being dubbed vulgar, unclean, and contaminating, among other things. So once again, Wilde revised. He didn't just make it less gay, but that was definitely part of the process. More romantic passages were removed, such as one where one male character mentions worshipping another. Even with that censored version, though, it was still, you guessed it, too gay, and brought out in Wilde's court case, which helped bankrupt him. The fully uncensored version of The Picture of Dorian Gray was finally released in 2011, over a century after Wilde had passed away. While The Picture of Dorian Gray has its flaws, for example, the quite egregious anti-Semitism, it also was hardly explicit or obscene, and definitely didn't warrant the treatment it got. But even the quiet implication of homosexuality was considered immoral enough. While our last title primarily dealt with meddling from publishers, this one actually does feature a book being brought to court. We're going to talk about The Well of Loneliness by British author Radcliffe Hall from 1928. The novel follows Stephen Gordon, the daughter of upper-class parents, as she grapples with attraction to women and gender nonconformity. Whether Stephen was a lesbian or transmasculine or both, we'll never know. In this era, one theory for queerness was that of the quote-unquote invert, the idea that gender nonconformity and homosexuality were caused by people's genders not matching with their internal inclinations, producing effeminate men and masculine women. The novel follows Stephen's struggles with not being accepted and having to keep her relationships covert, and ends with an earnest plea for queer acceptance. She states, "Give us also the right to our existence." As you might be able to tell from the fact that I'm talking about it in this segment, that right to existence didn't exactly come served on a silver platter. Shortly after the novel was published in England, James Douglas, the editor of the Sunday Express, declared it a book that must be suppressed, to the point that he said, and this is a real quote, "I would rather give a healthy boy or a healthy girl a phial of prussic acid than this novel. Poison kills the body, but moral poison kills the soul." Sheesh! He proceeded to take the book to Britain's Home Secretary, who pressured Hall's publisher into withdrawing the book from publication. Meanwhile, across the pond in America, a whole other battle was unfolding. The original American publisher of the book had no interest in publishing a book that had been banned in its home country, so the rights were bought by Pascal Covici Incorporated, a new publishing house. They also brought on Morris Ernst, co-founder of the ACLU and defender of other banned books, to be extra safe. And if you can believe it, somehow it worked, and the book stayed legal in the United States. It would, however, remain banned in Britain until 1949, 6 years after Hall had passed away. So, we've heard about a book censored by its publisher, a book brought to court, How about a book that, while never technically banned, the publishing industry at large tried to prevent from ever being released, despite the author's acclaim? James Baldwin was a writer and activist who made waves for his works, such as Go Tell It on the Mountain, a semi-autobiographical novel about blackness and religion in 1930s Harlem, and Notes of a Native Son, an essay collection on the black experience. But when Baldwin wanted to speak on queerness and sexuality in his book Giovanni's Room, people got scared. Giovanni's Room came out in 1956, and only a few years before, another book that touched on queer topics had gotten into serious legal trouble and been heavily censored. This other title was Woman's Barracks, which I don't have the time to get into, a lesbian pulp novel which, according to a Telegraph article, only avoided a national ban by having a narrator edited in to teach quote-unquote moral lessons, presumably about how immoral all of the queerness in the book was. According to scholar Quintana Rodriguez, whose work has been truly invaluable to this segment, this incident with Women's Barracks had a lot of publishers nervous. Even accomplished authors like Baldwin weren't safe. As Quintana Rodriguez states, American Cold War ideologies directly opposed communism and homosexuality, making Baldwin's association of homosexuality and the American identity a slap in the face to his American audience. His publisher actually told him the book would ruin his reputation and to burn the manuscript. The stakes were particularly high for Baldwin, too, as a black man, especially one whose previous works had focused on blackness and religion. Queer people of color often have unique struggles within their own communities. Baldwin's queerness put his blackness into question, something that unfortunately still happens today. But he did end up publishing Giovanni's Room, which follows a white American in Paris named David navigating masculinity, isolation, and bisexuality in his relationships with men and women. One scholar, Nathan A. Scott, called the book a quote-unquote detour from Go Tell It on the Mountain as a, quote, passionate gesture of identification with his people, unquote. Others declared the book un-American, but today it's one of his most known works for how deftly it explores identity and sexuality and, in its own way, race, despite Baldwin's claim that the novel could not handle race and sexuality at once. David is a tall blonde American, and the titular Giovanni that he gets involved with is a dark-skinned Italian man. There are entire essays interpreting that dynamic for a reason, and today Giovanni's Room is often considered one of Baldwin's most acclaimed works. So, there you have it. 3 stories of queer books and the unsuccessful attempts to suppress them. If there's anything to take away from this, it's that again, they've tried to silence us in the past and it's never stuck. And these are just stories from traditional literary publishing. Independent and underground circles have their own storied history. In an earlier season of this very podcast, I did a segment all about zines and their queer history, one largely owed to the fact that all you really needed for zine distribution was a copying machine. You didn't need a publisher, you didn't need a literary agent, you didn't need a big book deal. You were your own distributor. I digress. What else can we take from the past? We've seen how little things have changed, but what about what has? None of the titles we discussed today were particularly harrowing or obscene, but they also weren't exactly Pride Puppy, a literal children's book that just so happens to take place at a pride parade. So does that leave us better or worse off? It's kind of hard to say. In any of these previous eras, the idea of a book like Pride Puppy getting published at all would have been downright unthinkable. I guess if there's another thing to take away, it's that progress isn't always linear, and there are steps forward and steps back. A book like Pride Puppy can be published today, but it can also be suppressed. We have more means of connecting with our community than ever, but also we have people who want nothing more than to cut those ties. Our stories are getting more platforms, even if there are people who want to knock us down. But the fact is that queer people will always be here, and we'll always be telling our stories, no matter who tries to stop us.
Wow, what a great segment. I think it's really, really interesting and also could be kind of scary when I hear history like this and I hear about the book banning and censorship of art and realizing that I can look outside my window and see that happening today in the great 2026. But I think it's also really, really inspiring that here on IFQT and also just around the world, people are still telling these stories that people are trying to ban, but just like Giovanni's Room, and all the other banned books in this segment, the stories persist and they make their way out and they change lives. So thank you for this beautiful work that you've done.
Yeah, it was honestly just so bewildering being able to look back into the history and see all of these things that happened. Like, I can't believe that James Baldwin was told, do not write this. It will alienate your audience, because like Giovanni's Room is so widely regarded and claimed today, but, like, I guess that's still kind of happening. People are being told, you know, like, this book might get banned in this place. But I do love that folks are still writing the books anyway. That is something that we have always done and something we will continue to do. And that's really exciting. We're going to keep writing and talking and singing and probably swearing a fair bit when warranted because, sheesh, we are in some circumstances, but we're going to keep doing the thing. The last thing we're going to be is quiet.
We're not going to be quiet. We're going to keep writing. We're going to keep reading. And up next, we're going to hear from a small group of people who had a big idea. Build a queer library in Boston from the ground up. IFQT producer Lily Mueller sat down with some of the book lovers behind the QT library. Let's take a listen.
We're here to celebrate and uplift the curiosity and magic of the queer and trans community. That is sort of at its core, this is what we are fighting for. It is for this magic that, without queer and trans people doesn't exist.
I'm Jake. I use he, him pronouns or whatever pronouns you feel like using for me today. In 2022, I was at a job that I was struggling with a lot. And I was feeling very down and alone. And I knew that I really wanted to sort of do something for this community that I cared a lot about, the queer and trans community. That was the community that sort of held me through a pretty dark time in my life, and also that I'm a part of. And the TV show version of Heartstopper came out and I fell in love with it. And I was like, if I could just spend the rest of my life showing people Heartstopper or whatever the show is that is Heartstopper to them, then I would be so happy. And how gorgeous would that be? Because I'm ridiculous. I was like, what job would I have to make that possible? And then I was like, well, obviously I would have to be the gay librarian at the gay library. Then I reached out to a handful of friends and we started scheming and dreaming. And that's my long-winded way of saying that I'm the co-founder and also the board president, and I've been around since day one.
My name is Carli. I use she, they pronouns. I'm on the communications Q team. I found my way to the QT library because I was at Pride. We're looking for volunteers to build an LGBTQIA plus library. And I'm just like, wait, that's exactly what I was looking for, because with all the book ban legislation, the dropping of media literacy, I was like, wow, I would really love to do something with books.
My name is Nicola. My pronouns are they, she. I'm on the communications team. I didn't grow up with queer literature available, but when I was in high school, I read The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which isn't even really a queer book, but there's a queer character in it. That was revolutionary for me, and I was very excited.
I'm Sara. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a librarian in the rest of my life, a school librarian working in high schools for many years. I actually discovered QT, a straight library friend forwarded me the Kickstarter. I wasn't working at the time and sort of at loose ends and looking for a place I can contribute to something. The vibes here are exactly what I've been looking for.
The QT Library is a 501c3 nonprofit and all-volunteer collective that's working to build a brick-and-mortar queer and trans library and substance-free community space in Boston, Massachusetts. I've always thought of it as essentially everything that you understand to be true about your local public library branch, but queer. So it's going to be a physical space that's open to all, with chairs and tables and books and computers for people to use, and programming and community outreach, and a collection that is full of books that are curated by and for queer and trans people.
Libraries generally are a foundational part of communities because they're free. Anybody can come in. Anybody can use the resources that they provide, whatever they may be. Libraries are very much more than just a place to find books. They're a place to research. They're a place to rent out appliances. They're a place to take classes. But the fact that we are a queer and trans library means that any queer and trans person, or even anybody who wants to experience that can also come in for free. Just find like a community space where they feel comfortable.
Boston does not have an LGBTQ center, does not have a community center. It has historically, and it has an amazing youth-focused space called Bagley that is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful partners. But there is no sort of adult community center. Often community centers are centered around classrooms and service provision, and all of those are hugely, hugely important, but they're not necessarily places that you just want to go and like chill and hang out. When you think of a library, you know in an aesthetic way what that is, right? You know that there's like cozy rugs, and like, you know that the librarian is going to relate to you in a certain way. You know they're going to be kind, we hope. We know they're going to ask questions of you and be genuinely curious about your life and your world. There's a set of like relationships that we've established over time about why libraries are warm and welcoming spaces, and that's the thing that we want our community to be able to experience.
The idea of like the vanishing third space, like you don't really have a place where you can go hang out for free that is not like your house, a friend's house, or like school. Libraries in general, and then also the QT library specifically, can help to fill that space.
Queer spaces in this country are often bars and clubs, but it's really nice to have options and to have sort of a full tapestry of possibilities for a community to connect with each other.
That means families and kids, people under the age of 21, can also interact with the QT library and have like that space to experience queer community.
I think that like the in-person of going into a library and just like, oh, I didn't even know about this book. Those sort of accidental connections with people in unexpected places, like that's so important to community building and to like feeling seen yourself. So books and people that you weren't planning on finding, I think is really powerful.
What do you think, the value of people having access to diverse collections and diverse representations of queer media just at their fingertips for free?
I remember in 2003, when I was 8, going to the library and being like, maybe there's one gay book. Hope I can find it. The reason that those books are on shelves now is because people stood up and said these are really important and we should buy them for our library and we should take the time it takes to put them into our system, and then we should make sure that they are publicized and shared. I had a recent call with a woman who works for another organization that sort of supports LGBTQ folks and allies. And she goes, well, I live in Idaho, and if there's one gay book in the library where I live, then the library gets shut down. And I was like, we are living in very different realities. We know that this administration is doing violence every day to trans people in particular. A part of violence is erasure, like erasure of stories, erasure of selves, erasure of people from public record. And I think the thing that combats erasure is the creative act and the public record in the places that where we can do this work a little bit more, like without censorship from the state. We have to do it so that we can then spread that work.
Even just hearing about the QT library can inspire people. You know, I've heard people say like, oh my God, I wish you were in New York. I wish you were in, like, in just naming any state. You know, if we can do it, then other people can do it too.
And what I'm really excited about is like the day that we can compile a packet that's like, build your own QT library. And so anybody who wants to start one in their town can. It's not quite franchising, but it's like, how do we like empower people to build beyond what we have built?
And also just like having a place where you can find those queer and trans books, because for the longest time I just like didn't even know about those experiences, didn't know those were possible experiences. So having also that ease to find those books is a huge, huge, huge thing that you can do for people.
There is systematic erasure of queer history in just like the media, in school. Like we don't learn about our own history. Seeing yourself in media, seeing yourself in a book, seeing yourself on TV or in a movie, or even seeing someone who shares your identity but expresses it differently. If there is representation that you can access, it shows you that like the LGBTQA community is not a monolith and there's room to be LGBTQA plus and still be who you are. And you also don't have to be alone, whatever your identity is. Like there are people out there.
If there's something that you've done with QT so far that you're proudest of, or that was your favorite thing, I would love to hear about it.
People being like going up to us at a tabling thing and being like, oh yeah, I follow you on Instagram. I look forward to your newsletter every month. I think just hearing that people are hearing about us means that there is a community that longs for something like this and it can be built.
Something I'm really, proud of is shortly after I got involved with QT, got connected with a community member who was coming out later in life and was like, hey, I know I'm not the only one having this experience, and I want to connect with other people who are also coming out late in life, and founded this late in life affinity space, which we host through QT. And to have that space and to see, how people are able to connect and find that community there has just been really, really special.
I don't know, but I'm assuming that the QT library has been affected by recent federal grant cuts. And I know in general there's been a lot of obstacles along the way to the brick-and-mortar space, so I really want to admire and acknowledge everyone's perseverance in doing the thing. I wanted to know if anyone had any advice, any words of encouragement or wisdom for other queer people that want to make a difference in their communities.
We, or at least I, have, since 2022, have come to every interaction I have ever had about the library with delusional confidence. When we started the library, we picked a date and we were like, June 2024, it's going to be open. We will have $1 million. We will have a staff of 5 people. It's going to be perfect and done. And when we didn't hit June 2024, I was like, damn, I failed. We didn't do it. And then I was reminded by all of the wonderful people in this organization that the fact that we're doing it at all is a miracle. The fact that we've gotten as far as we have is a testament to so many people contributing in so many different ways. Go at the pace that feels right and good and ethical to you. And if it's too much, slow down. If you feel like you have more in the tank, speed up. But don't let yourself be pressured by the capitalist overlords who are go, 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 go. It has to be finished tomorrow.
I can have a hard time with sort of saying oh, I need help with this. I want you to be part of this. Working on this reframe of what we are offering. It's not an imposition. It's an invitation. That is a powerful shift for me to think about, is that what we're doing is not asking for money or asking for volunteers. Is we are inviting and saying hey, we're doing this cool thing and we think you would like to do this cool thing with us. Let's make that happen.
We are so eager for folks to join in at every level. Whether you are a person who's I just want to hang out in the QT Library volunteer Discord and see what y'all are chatting about. Or if you're I have 20 hours a week that I can give to this project, which, okay, come join us. We really, really encourage you to reach out. You can always email hello@qtlibrary.org. Sign up for an info session, which will get you just a little bit more detail than you experienced on this podcast. You can just jump right in by filling out our Get to Know You questionnaire. You can donate. Donations are always deeply appreciated. And you can also donate a book off of one of our bookshop wish lists, or a used or new book that you have in your home. All of this information is on the website, but all of this is just to say that this is a project for every queer and trans person and all the people who love them. And we are so grateful to anyone who steps up in any way to help us make this dream possible.
The organization I work for is the Future Perfect Project, so we ask everybody, what's your dream for the perfect future, either for this project or for the world?
I grew up in a teeny tiny hometown, middle of nowhere, pre-internet. I know gay men exist, I know lesbians, but I'm not either of those things. a perfect future, like, is a world where young people see the possibility models of just, like, different ways to be in the world. Sims Bishop has the great quote about, like, books being windows and mirrors. And I had a lot of windows as a voracious reader, but I think, like, that, like, everyone can find a mirror in a book. I don't know if that gets us to a perfect future, but I know it gets us closer.
Well, that's our show. I'm Samuel Smalls Jr.
And I'm Alex K. Massey, and you're listening to
I'm Feeling Queer Today. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and share the show with your friends, family, or even your parallel play study partner. A 5-star rating goes a long way to support us in making more episodes of this podcast.
If you're new here, welcome to the party. Make sure you go back and check out seasons 1, 2, and 3 of the podcast. We think you'll like them a lot. And stay tuned for part 3 of our exploration of queer literature out in 2 weeks.
We want to hear from you. That's why we set up our own online voice box for you, our listeners, to leave us messages. Go to speakpipe.com/IFQT and drop us a line. That's speakpipe.com/IFQT. Let us know what you think of the podcast, any topics you want us to cover on the pod, and don't forget to ask yourself, how am I feeling queer today?
For more information and resources about this episode, check out the show notes in the description or check out the episode page at thefutureperfectproject.org/podcast.
If you or a young person you know between the ages of 13 and 24 is currently in crisis, visit thetrevorproject.org for LGBTQIA+ specific support through text and chat, or call 1-866-488-7386. These resources will also be in the show notes.
To learn more about the Future Perfect Project, head to our website, thefutureperfectproject.org, and you can find us on social media at The Future Perfect Project.
IFQT is produced by the Future Perfect Project with support from Radio Kingston, WKNY, Kingston, New York, and the I'm Feeling Queer Today producer team. Parker McKenzie, Lily Mueller, Zorian Edwards, Eric Eubank, Alex K. Massey, and me, Samuel Smalls Jr. LGBTQ+ young people from all over the country.
Our theme song is composed by me, Alex K. Massey, produced by Kayla Pekikaro, and performed by Melody Korkmaz, Chris Lunetta, Kayla Pekikaro, and me, Alex K. Massey. Additional music from Epidemic Sound.
This episode was edited by Alex K. Massey and Emma Jane Seslowski. Episode mixing and mastering by Ty Rex. Thank you to our friends from QT Library, Jake, Carli, Nicola, and Sara. Learn more about the QT Library at qtlibrary.org or follow them on Instagram at qt.library.
Special thanks to IFQT executive producers Ryan Amador and Emma Jane Seslowski, artistic director Celeste Lacine, and Future Perfect Project team members David Artavia, Kiko Wan, and Aaliyah Jamil.